Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a world where the word doctor didn't mean safety, it meant risk. You're about to meet healers who might save your life or make you wish they hadn't tried. Imagine lying on a stone slab somewhere between a temple and a butcher shop, surrounded by flickering oil lamps, incense smoke, and a man holding a bronze knife that's never been cleaned. You probably won't survive this one, but hey, at least it'll make a good bedtime story. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in the cradle of civilization, somewhere between the rivers of Mesopotamia and the deserts of Egypt. Here, long before stethoscopes or scalpels, medicine was a whisper to the gods. Illness wasn't biology, it was punishment. You fall sick because a spirit was offended or because the stars turned their gaze away. A healer comes, not in white robes, but in rough linen smeared with oil and dust. His tools are simple, a clay tablet etched with prayers, a handful of herbs, and a steady chant that trembles in the air like bees in summer heat. He leans close, breath thick with incense, and traces symbols on your skin. You can smell crushed garlic and honey, not as food, but as medicine. Historians still argue whether some of these remedies actually worked or whether they simply kept the mind calm long enough for the body to heal itself. Either way, you close your eyes and hope the spirit is listening. You move from one civilization to another, from the reed huts of the Tigris to the limestone temples of Egypt. In every place, you find the same quiet panic in people's eyes when someone falls ill. There are no hospitals, no pharmacies, no sterile tools. There are only rituals. A child burns with fever, and the healer grinds beetles into paste. A farmer's leg festers from a cut, and he's told to sleep beneath a statue of a god. Healing was an act of faith, and sometimes, of luck. Somewhere in the distance, a scribe presses a stylus into clay, recording a spell that begins, "If the demon of sickness dwells in the body." That's not poetry. That's medicine. In Egypt, things get a little more complicated. You wander through a corridor painted with falcons and lotus flowers, entering the House of Life, part library, part clinic, part temple. The healers here, the priests of Sekhmet and Imhotep, carry scrolls filled with recipes. Honey for wounds. Moldy bread for infection. Yes, actual mold. Long before antibiotics were discovered. There's a kind of logic hiding inside the mysticism, as if the ancient mind knew truth but couldn't quite articulate it. But then, you look at the other side of the same scroll. It says to place the patient's hair inside a clay jar, bury it beneath the moon, and whisper to Isis until the fever breaks. Science and superstition share the same page. And you realize, medicine wasn't about curing yet, it was about coping. You picture yourself lying under a thatched roof, wrapped in linen, watching as someone lights incense and waves it around your body to drive out invisible forces. You want to laugh, but part of you feels comforted. Even now, when you're sick, don't you still want someone to say a few words over you, to believe in your healing more than you can? Maybe that instinct never really leaves humanity. Historians still debate whether ancient physicians were more charlatan or pioneer, but perhaps it's unfair to judge them by modern standards. When there are no microscopes, no antibiotics, no anesthesia, what is a doctor supposed to be except a mixture of hope and performance? And yet, even in this primitive world, there were patterns. A Babylonian text lists over 100 diseases. The Egyptians catalogued hundreds of herbs. In India, the Atharva Veda described healing chants, while in China, bone needles pricked the flow of invisible energy, the beginnings of acupuncture. Across continents, people searched for a way to make pain meaningful, to turn suffering into story. As you drift deeper into this ancient scene, the noises soften. The healer's chants echo off mud walls. The night smells of frankincense and wet earth. Somewhere, a clay pot simmers over coals, filled with herbs you've never heard of, fenugreek, myrrh, cinnamon bark. You listen to the slow bubbling, the rhythmic breath of the healer, and the distant sound of wind moving over reeds. You realize something quietly profound. These early healers weren't wrong. They were the first to try. Every mistake they made, every odd poultice, every whispered spell, became the compost from which real medicine would grow. You owe them your vaccines, your hospitals, your very comfort in believing that sickness can be cured. Still, as you lie there, you can't shake the thought that in this world, the healer could just as easily harm you. One wrong ingredient, one impure jar, one prayer said at the wrong hour, and your fever might rise forever. The line between life and death is thin as a papyrus reed. Your eyelids grow heavy, and the temple around you flickers with candlelight. You hear the healer's final words, "The gods will decide." And for now, they have decided to let you rest. You wake, or maybe you never slept, to the sound of something dripping. The smell is sharp, metallic, and oddly sweet. Candlelight wavers across stone walls, and in front of you stands a man with calm eyes and a bowl filled with dark red liquid. He doesn't look cruel. In fact, he looks serene, as though about to perform a sacred act. "Too much blood," he murmurs. "We'll fix that." Welcome to the age of humors, when your entire body was thought to be ruled by 4 invisible fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health meant balance, sickness meant chaos. And the cure? Bring the scales back into alignment, by any means necessary. You sit upright as the doctor ties a cord around your arm. The veins rise, blue and trembling, beneath your skin. The blade he uses is small but ancient, sharp enough to slice, dull enough to hurt. You watch your own blood fall in slow, mesmerizing drops. The doctor hums to himself, maybe to calm you, maybe to calm his conscience. Leeches crawl in a jar nearby, slick and hungry. In a few minutes, one might find a home on your neck, your arm, even your eyelid. Bloodletting wasn't barbaric, it was mainstream. Everyone, kings, knights, and commoners, believed it could drain away evil and restore peace. Historians still argue whether it helped or simply provided a ritual of control, something to do when faced with helplessness. The most famous physicians of Greece and Rome swore by this method. Galen, the revered Roman doctor, built his entire system of medicine on balancing the humors. He dissected animals, not humans, guessing how the body worked by comparison. His theories lasted not decades but centuries, shaping every diagnosis for more than 1,000 years. Even when people were dying faster than they were healing, no one dared challenge him. You picture yourself walking through a medieval street. A barber's pole spins outside a wooden door, the red and white stripes representing bandages and blood. Inside, the barber surgeon sharpens his razor on a leather strap. He might cut hair, pull teeth, or drain your veins all before lunch. "Better out than in," he mutters, with the casual confidence of a man who's never read a medical textbook, because none exist yet. Sometimes you wonder how people survived it at all. But in truth, they didn't always. The human body is stubborn. It can lose blood and still breathe. It can suffer infection and still heal, sometimes in spite of the doctor, not because of him. And when a patient did recover, the physician was praised, the ritual validated. Success stories were remembered, failures were buried quietly, both literally and figuratively. There's a peculiar beauty in that blindness. They wanted to help, truly. But without microscopes or germ theory, the body was a mystery box that could only be opened through pain. Even the most brilliant minds of their age worked within darkness, guided by candlelight and faith. In China, a different kind of balance ruled the body, yin and yang. Illness came from imbalance, and the cure required harmony. In India, Ayurvedic healers mapped energy through dashas, prescribing herbs and diets instead of knives. Everywhere, the same desire to restore order to the chaos of flesh, but through entirely different philosophies. You imagine yourself lying on a rough wooden table, a cold draft crawling over your skin. A healer hovers above you, murmuring about your humors. Maybe your face is too pale, too much phlegm. Maybe your temper is short, too much yellow bile. Whatever the diagnosis, the solution is the same: release, purge, balance. There's a certain dark poetry to it. The belief that pain could bring harmony, that suffering could cleanse. Even now, you recognize the echo in detox diets, cold plunges, rituals of self-discipline. The need to believe that discomfort means progress. Maybe ancient medicine never truly left, it just changed its costume. Leeches squirm in your imagination. A single one can drink 5 times its weight in blood. In some medieval hospitals, entire jars were imported from swamps. They were so valuable that doctors kept them under lock and key, the original biomedical equipment. And when they fell out of fashion centuries later, they didn't disappear entirely. Modern surgeons still use them, quietly, to restore blood flow in delicate operations. The past always leaves fingerprints. Somewhere in this dark room, you hear a patient sigh in relief as the doctor lifts the blade. He seals the wound with cobwebs, nature's bandage, and presses a scrap of cloth against your arm. The bleeding slows. You feel lightheaded but oddly calm, as though some weight truly has been lifted. Perhaps that was the secret, not the blood itself, but the belief that its release could cleanse you. Historians still debate when medicine began to drift from mysticism to method, but in moments like this, it's hard to tell the difference. The ritual, the rhythm, the soft voice assuring you that pain will bring peace. Isn't that the essence of healing even today? The room grows quiet. The last candle burns low. You lie back, eyes half closed, blood humming softly in your ears. Outside, the wind moves through empty streets, carrying with it the faint scent of iron and smoke. You think of all the people who lay on similar tables, under similar skies, and trusted the same trembling hands. The healer nods, satisfied. Balanced, he says, as if harmony were something you could measure in a bowl. You close your eyes, and the world fades to a steady pulse, your own, fragile and ancient, beating softly through the centuries. You wake in the hush of dawn, the air heavy with incense and something older, faith. Around you, columns rise like petrified trees, their capitals carved with serpents winding endlessly toward the ceiling. This isn't a hospital. It's a temple. You've been brought here not because you're sick, but because your sickness is believed to have meaning. A priest approaches in silence. His linen robe whispers against the stone floor. In one hand, he carries a bronze bowl filled with oil. In the other, a wooden staff coiled with a living snake. He tells you to lie down, to close your eyes, and to let the gods see you. This is the sanctuary of Asclepius, the Greek god of healing, part hospital, part shrine, part dream chamber. Pilgrims traveled miles to reach this place, often crawling, carried, or half dead from fever. They came not for medicine, but for miracles. You're one of them now. They call the process incubation. You lie on a stone bed inside the temple overnight, waiting for the god to visit you in your dreams. Sometimes he appears as a man, sometimes as a serpent. In the morning, priests interpret your vision. If you dream of water, you'll be bathed. If you dream of fire, you'll be cauterized. If you dream of blood, you'll be bled. Every cure begins as a story. Some archaeologists believe that priests secretly watched patients as they slept, using observation to guide treatment, early psychology hiding behind divine theater. Others say it was pure suggestion, the power of the mind over the body. Historians still argue whether these temples were more science than faith, but in this moment, as you listen to chanting echo off the marble, the distinction doesn't matter. Healing is happening, just not the way you'd expect. You rise at dawn, led to a pool surrounded by statues of coiled serpents. The priest dips a cup into the water and pours it over your head. The chill shocks your body awake. You feel a pulse of something, belief, perhaps, spreading through your skin. The temple smells of pine resin and burned myrrh. Somewhere behind you, a chorus hums, low and unbroken, like the wind in a cave. Across the Mediterranean, Egypt holds its own temples of healing. The god Imhotep, once a man, a brilliant architect turned divine physician, is worshipped in stone halls filled with hieroglyphs of eyes and hearts. People leave offerings of carved limbs, little clay arms and legs, hoping the god will fix the real ones. You watch a scribe dip a reed into ink, writing a prayer for a child with fever. A cat wanders past, unbothered, as incense curls into the sky. You can almost feel the weight of thousands of years of faith pressing through the air. There's beauty in it, this human need to turn fear into ritual, illness into meaning. And maybe that's why these sanctuaries endured. because sometimes when medicine fails, the ritual itself is the cure. Even now, the symbol of medicine, the rod entwined by a snake, comes from these ancient temples. What began as a god's staff became the emblem of doctors everywhere. The serpent, once feared, became the guardian of healing. Isn't that just like humanity, to turn danger into comfort and chaos into order? A priest walks by carrying a basket of herbs. Inside, you see frankincense, coriander, and opium poppy, the ingredients of ancient prescriptions. Opium was known for its power to quiet pain, though they didn't understand why. They used it sparingly, fearing its connection to dreams and death. You take a deep breath and almost taste the sweetness of it in the air. Outside the temple walls, the world is still brutal. War, famine, plague, none of it stops for prayers. But here, within the soft echo of hymns and the calm glow of oil lamps, people find something that science alone can't offer: comfort. The illusion of safety, the feeling of being seen by something greater than themselves. You lie back again, the stone beneath you cool and smooth. Your eyelids grow heavy. Somewhere near your feet, a snake slides across the floor, sacred, unharming. You think of all the centuries in which people have done this exact thing. Closed their eyes, whispered their pain, and waited for healing to arrive through a dream. Maybe, in a way, it still does. We might call it placebo now, or psychology, or self-soothing. But it's the same ancient current, the mind persuading the body to believe it can get better. Historians still debate whether the Asclepian temples actually healed people or merely gave them hope. But in the hush of the sanctuary, as the snake god slithers past your dreams, you can't tell the difference. Healing, it seems, has never been entirely physical. The priest returns and places his hand gently on your forehead. His voice is low, steady like the tide. "Sleep," he says. "Let the god do his work." And so you do. The wind rustles the olive trees outside, the oil lamps flicker, and the faint scent of burning herbs fills your lungs. You drift, halfway between body and belief, between sickness and surrender, where the line between medicine and miracle disappears into the soft hum of night. You wake again, but this time it's the smell that greets you first, thick, choking, unforgettable. The stench of sweat, sour herbs, damp straw, and something metallic beneath it all. The smell of sickness. You sit up slowly and realize you're inside what passes for a hospital, though the word doesn't yet exist. It's an open hall, dark except for shafts of light slicing through slatted windows. Dozens of people lie on pallets, moaning softly. You pull the blanket closer to your face, but the odor follows. Old blood, mold, incense, and the unmistakable sweetness of rot. It isn't filth by neglect, it's the smell of the living and the dying sharing one room. In these ancient wards, air itself is medicine. Or rather, poison. For most of history, people believed disease traveled through miasma, corrupted air. If a city smelled bad, it was sick. If your house reeked of sweat or waste, you were doomed. And so, doctors fought smell as if it were the enemy. Perfume became armor. The richer you were, the stronger your scent. A physician's robe would be drenched in vinegar and herbs, his mask stuffed with crushed roses and cloves. To breathe was to risk infection, so every breath had to be purified. You wander down the row of patients, careful not to touch anyone. Some have fevers, their skin gleaming with oil. Others shiver under blankets, their lips cracked from dehydration. A healer moves from bed to bed, murmuring words you can't quite catch. In his hands, a bundle of dried sage, a jar of honey, and a small cup of something dark, maybe wine, maybe medicine. He dips his fingers, presses them to a patient's lips, and whispers, "Breathe gently, the air is healing now." Historians still argue whether the miasma theory helped or hindered progress. In some ways, it saved lives. The obsession with clean air led cities to build better ventilation, open courtyards, and gardens. But it also blinded them to the real culprits, the unseen bacteria breeding in the water and the blood. It would take centuries before anyone would dare say that smell was not the cause, only the symptom. A child coughs nearby, a dry, rasping sound that cuts through the chanting. The healer rushes over, sprinkling the floor with vinegar, then burns a handful of herbs until smoke fills the room. You cough too, eyes watering, the air shimmering with gray light. Somewhere behind the smoke, you hear a woman whispering a prayer. The human instinct to find pattern in chaos never fails. When death stalks unseen, we blame the air, the gods, the stars, anything but randomness. Even now, with microscopes and masks, we still search for someone to blame when we're sick. Maybe that's why the miasma lingered so long. It gave fear a name, and naming always makes fear smaller. In another corner, an assistant grinds herbs in a stone mortar. The rhythmic crunch of pestle against leaf becomes a kind of heartbeat. You peek inside, mint, myrrh, and garlic, the ancient holy trinity of cleansing. Garlic, especially, was considered powerful enough to chase demons and disease alike. Maybe that's why soldiers carried it into battle, or why even now we whisper about its healing properties. You sit by an open window where the wind drifts in from the city beyond. Even there, the air carries sickness, but also life. You can hear the market, the chatter of merchants, the rattle of carts. Ordinary life moving on, unaware of the invisible storms swirling through it. A healer stops beside you, holding a mask shaped like a beak, long, curved, stuffed with herbs. It's unsettling and familiar, the ancestor of the later plague doctor. He explains that the mask filters the bad air, that it keeps the sickness away. You try not to laugh, but you can't deny the small comfort it brings. The illusion of safety is sometimes enough to let the body rest. He offers you a cloth soaked in vinegar and rosewater. You press it to your face and inhale. The sour sweetness burns your throat, but beneath it you sense a strange calm. Your mind softens, your heart slows, and for the first time since you entered this place, the smell doesn't seem so terrible. Historians have found fragments of instructions from Roman and medieval hospitals that read like poetry of desperation. Burn cedarwood. Scatter juniper. Keep windows open to the east. The rules sound mystical, but hidden within them is the faint pulse of logic. Ventilation, sanitation, sunlight. Progress disguised as ritual. You look up at the rafters and see light pouring through cracks in the roof. Dust floats in slow spirals, golden and weightless. You realize that in these halls of sickness, people still sought beauty. Someone hung herbs to dry from the beams. Someone placed a pot of flowers near the doorway. A quiet rebellion against decay. As night falls, the air thickens again. You hear the healer humming softly as he tends to a dying man. He dabs his forehead with cool water, muttering a prayer to keep the soul calm as it slips away. Outside, a faint breeze carries the scent of rain. The healer lifts his head and smiles. The air has changed. The sickness, he believes, will weaken. You close your eyes, letting that thought settle in your chest. The air feels heavy but alive, as if history itself is breathing through it. And for a moment, you almost believe it's true, that every illness can be soothed if the wind just turns the right way. You hear the faint scrape of metal against stone before you see the surgeon. A thin beam of sunlight catches his tools. Bone saws, knives, forceps, all arranged neatly on a wooden table, each one promising precision, each one capable of disaster. You try to swallow, but your throat is dry. There's no anesthesia here. There's only willpower, prayer, and the faint hope that the body can endure. You're about to witness surgery in the ancient world. In Rome, India, or China, surgeons performed amputations, trepanations, and tumor removals without modern pain relief. Patients were awake, fully conscious, often restrained by family members or assistants. You watch as the surgeon steadies his hand, murmuring instructions, wiping sweat from his brow. The scent of herbs lingers: opium, mandrake, and wine, sometimes used to dull pain, sometimes merely to calm the patient. You lie back on the rough table, heart hammering, and remember what the healer said about balance. It applies here too, balance between life and death, between courage and terror. Historians still argue whether ancient surgical techniques were more effective than the dangers they introduced. In some cases, patients survived against all odds. In others, infection claimed them before the tools could finish the work. In India, the surgeon Sushruda's texts describe procedures in astonishing detail: sutures, scalpels, even early forms of cataract removal. Yet, you notice the tension in every line, the recognition that knowledge alone could not guarantee survival. The human body, unpredictable and stubborn, always had the final say. You imagine the scene outside the surgery hall, the chatter of the city, the clatter of carts, the distant cries of children. No one stops for the screams echoing from within. Medicine was a profession of extremes, delicate skill matched with crude instruments. A misstep could sever an artery, but a steady hand might save a life. Every action carried weight. You hear the surgeon speak softly to his apprentice, demonstrating the careful angle of a knife. The apprentice nods, eyes wide, aware that each lesson could cost them a patient's life or theirs. The air smells faintly of wine and iron, mingling with the patient's fear, the doctor's focus, and the cool stone of the building. Meanwhile, in China, surgeons were performing similar feats. Acupuncture was used to relieve pain, while small knives and cauterizing tools addressed injuries. Pain management relied on meditation, herbal sedatives, or sheer endurance. The body was both a puzzle and a canvas, treated with a combination of skill, tradition, and ritual. You notice small comforts. An assistant hands the patient a swig of wine. A cloth is pressed to the forehead. Yet, the line between aid and harm remains razor-thin. Surgeons of the time understood anatomy poorly, antiseptics were unknown, and infection was a silent predator. The risk was omnipresent. Still, there is fascination in observing this dance. The confidence, the rhythm of hands, the ritual of incision and closure. Even mistakes become part of learning, passed down in texts, sketches, and oral tradition. Medicine was not yet a science. It was an art steeped in observation, improvisation, and hope. Historians note that despite the horrors, surgical innovations laid the foundation for modern practice. Trepanation, cauterization, suturing, all primitive yet effective beginnings. You see the lineage of knowledge threading through the centuries, each cut a connection between then and now. You exhale slowly, letting the weight of history settle in your chest. The surgeon wipes his hands, nods to his assistant, and steps back. The patient lies pale but alive, a testament to human resilience and daring. You feel a strange admiration mixed with relief, realizing that survival was a collaboration between body, mind, and a touch of luck. And as your eyelids grow heavy, you recognize the pattern. Even in the most terrifying circumstances, humanity always reaches for balance, for understanding, for healing. You shift on the hard stone, brushing against the faint scent of herbs still clinging to the air. The healer approaches with a small wooden tray, its surface scratched and darkened by years of use. On it are tiny vials and lumps of substances that gleam strangely in the dim light. Mercury, lead, and something you can't quite identify. The thought crosses your mind. Some of these remedies might be worse than the sickness itself. This is the world of cures that cursed, a time when doctors genuinely believed that dangerous substances could purge illness. Mercury, for instance, was used to treat everything from skin infections to syphilis, though it often caused severe poisoning. Lead found its way into tonics, and yes, crocodile dung was even applied as a contraceptive or wound dressing in some cultures. You probably wouldn't survive a day with these practices, yet millions did, more by sheer resilience than by treatment. The healer dips a spoon into a thick, dark paste and applies it to a patient's wound. The skin tightens immediately, and a sharp, metallic tang fills your nostrils. You flinch, imagining the internal toll of these remedies, but the patient seems calm, trusting the ritual as much as the medicine itself. Historians still argue whether some treatments were marginally effective or entirely placebo, and yet the act of care mattered just as much as the substance. In Egypt, papyri describe ointments containing lead, frankincense, and animal fats, prescribed for wounds and infections. The rationale was symbolic as much as chemical. Poison could fight poison, strong substances could push disease out of the body. It's a logic that seems alien today, yet it dominated the thinking of physicians for centuries. You watch as another healer mixes a concoction, murmuring incantations over the pot. The paste smells bitter, almost acrid, but the rhythm of the ritual is hypnotic. Herbs are crushed, powders sifted, and liquids combined in precise sequences, guided by tradition and intuition. Each movement, each word, is a promise of healing, or at least the attempt at it. The patients lie quietly, allowing themselves to be smeared, wrapped, or ingested with substances that might harm them. The mind often plays a role, as does trust in the practitioner. Sometimes this faith brought miraculous recovery. Other times it brought suffering. You feel the tension between hope and danger in the very air you breathe. Across cultures, similar patterns emerge. In medieval Europe, alchemists experimented with minerals and metals, creating potions with extravagant names that promised vitality or cleansing. In India, Ayurvedic medicine prescribed compounds with mercury and arsenic, carefully prepared, according to tradition, to minimize harm. Even when toxic, these remedies were seen as potent agents against illness. You think of the patient lying nearby, eyes closed, trusting that this paste, this bitter draught, will restore balance. You realize that for centuries, healing was an act of courage, both for the practitioner and the patient. There's a strange intimacy in this shared risk, a silent acknowledgement of humanity's vulnerability. Somewhere in the distance, a child coughs, a reminder that illness waits for no one. Yet the healer continues, calm and deliberate, applying substances that may burn, cleanse, or harm. The act itself is a dance between knowledge, intuition, and courage, bridging centuries of experimentation and superstition. You notice the subtle gestures. A nod to an assistant, a pat on the patient's shoulder, a whispered word of reassurance. Medicine is more than chemistry. It is ritual, empathy, and courage. Even the most dangerous treatments are tempered by care. Historians still debate the ethics of these practices, yet there is no doubt about the intent: to heal, to fight illness with every tool available, however perilous. And as you lie back, absorbing the strange blend of fear and fascination, you realize that medicine has always carried shadows. Shadows that remind us how precious life truly is. You hear the soft shuffle of feet across straw-strewn floors. A woman appears, older, steady, her hands lined with years of work and knowledge. She carries a small basket of herbs, roots, and dried flowers, each labeled with care. She isn't a priest, not a physician, not an official of any temple. She is a midwife, a wise woman, a keeper of local cures, and in many ways, she has saved more lives than the doctors you've witnessed. You follow her through narrow corridors, past the scent of boiled herbs and burning incense, to a small room where a mother struggles with a newborn. The midwife moves confidently, checking pulses, adjusting blankets, whispering instructions. Her knowledge is empirical, built on observation over decades. She blends chamomile for calm, yarrow for bleeding, and a touch of honey to ward off infection. Each remedy is simple, yet effective, and entirely absent from the formal teachings of physicians. Yet there's danger here too. The line between healer and heretic is thin. In many societies, women who practiced medicine outside the sanctioned channels were accused of witchcraft. A wise woman could be admired and feared in equal measure, celebrated when she healed, persecuted when she failed. You realize how fragile life is, and how precarious trust once was. Historians still argue whether witchcraft accusations stemmed from genuine fear or a society's attempt to control women's knowledge. You watch her prepare a poultice for a burn. She crushes leaves with a wooden mortar, murmuring a chant that sounds almost like counting, almost like prayer. The patient's skin glows as the paste is applied. You notice how gently she moves, how her touch seems to soothe the patient before the medicine does. The act itself carries weight, sometimes enough to sway recovery. In Europe, these women were often the first line of defense against disease. They delivered children, treated wounds, and advised on herbal cures. They knew what worked, what failed, and what merely comforted. They observed the patient, adjusted the remedy, and learned from the results. Their knowledge was dynamic, flexible, unlike the rigid doctrines of the universities. You imagine a darkened village, winter pressing in. A midwife moves from hut to hut, carrying her herbs and small comforts, a silent guardian against illness and fear. In her hands, death is not always inevitable. The simple act of care, A poultice, a touch, a whispered reassurance can outweigh even the most dangerous poison prescribed by a doctor. Some remedies seem strange today: a garland of herbs hung over the cradle to prevent sickness, or a tea brewed from plants said to balance the humors. Quirky, yes, but remarkably effective in many cases. And often, the act of preparation, selecting, crushing, steeping, is as healing as the medicine itself. You reflect on the paradox. The sanctioned doctors carry dangerous substances, complex instruments, and authoritative knowledge, yet the midwives, herbalists, and wise women often save more lives. It's a lesson in humility, in the value of observation, experience, and the quiet power of care. You watch her step back, surveying her work. The patient breathes easier, the mother's hands tremble less. Outside, the wind carries the smell of pine and smoke. You think about the thousands of women across centuries, tending to the sick and dying, often in silence, often unrecorded. Their knowledge persists, hidden in folklore, in herbal gardens, in the rituals we still follow without thinking. Even now, you recognize a fragment of this practice in modern medicine: the nurse who checks on you quietly, the midwife who guides without fanfare, the caregiver whose touch comforts more than any pill. Medicine, in its purest form, has always been about presence, observation, and trust. And you, lying here in the dim light, realize that these wise women were as dangerous to the old order as any rogue physician, for they reminded the world that healing need not be tied to authority, only to understanding. The sound of distant bells and hurried footsteps reaches you as you enter a city gripped by panic. People clutch their chests, cough violently, or stumble through streets filled with the scent of rot and unwashed bodies. You are in the midst of a plague, a wave of sickness that sweeps through communities like an unstoppable tide. Healers of every kind, doctors, priests, midwives, move quickly, their minds a blur of ritual, remedy, and desperation. You follow one such healer as he navigates narrow alleys, holding a bundle of herbs and a small vial of vinegar. In one hand, he carries hope, in the other, a sharp understanding that most of his patients may not survive. The streets are littered with debris and bodies. Smoke curls from burning refuse, intended to purify the air. The healer murmurs prayers between breaths, sprinkling crushed rosemary and sage as he passes, believing in both the scent and the faith that it might protect the living. Plague was not simply a medical challenge, it was a test of society's patience and resilience. Historians still debate whether quarantines of the time truly slowed the disease or merely offered the illusion of control. In Venice and Florence, officials mandated isolation of the sick, while doctors prescribed herbal concoctions or strange rituals to ward off infection. You watch families hide in fear, clutching their children and hoping that distance, smoke, and faith can keep the sickness at bay. In Athens centuries earlier, physicians faced similar challenges during outbreaks of typhoid and dysentery. Some relied on observation, noting which patients survived and which didn't, attempting to discern patterns where none were obvious. Others fell back on superstition, sacrificing animals or reciting prayers to appease the gods. The line between medicine and ritual blurs in your mind as you follow the healer from one house to the next. You notice how the healer moves with a combination of urgency and caution. He dips a cloth in vinegar to wipe surfaces, administers herbal teas to the feverish, and whispers blessings to the dying. In this chaos, care itself becomes a form of medicine, a tactile reassurance that someone is present, someone is watching. The ritual is both psychological and physical, grounding the patient even as their body falters. A family gestures for him to enter their home. Inside, a father lies pale and trembling. The healer applies a poultice to his chest, chanting quietly while sprinkling ash and herbs around the bed. The mother watches anxiously, her hands folded, her eyes wide with fear. You can almost feel the tension, the thin hope that this combination of care, herbs, and belief might tip the balance toward survival. Even in remote villages, the same patterns repeat. Smoke, sound, and touch create a fragile shield against unseen agents. Some treatments are quixotic, a concoction of crushed pearls, a poultice of burnt eggshells. Quirky and sometimes absurd, yet part of a broader understanding that human ingenuity must contend with forces far beyond comprehension. You realize that plague is not just a test of the body, but a test of trust and courage. Healers rely on observation, improvisation, and decades of experience. They adapt rituals, swap remedies, and attempt to maintain calm in the face of overwhelming despair. In every gesture, you sense the tension between science, superstition, and survival. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of these early interventions, but one truth remains undeniable: the presence of care, whether through herbs, rituals, or vigilant observation, often made the difference between despair and hope. You see it in the healer's patient gaze, the mother's gentle touch, the faint relief of a fever breaking. You take a deep breath, inhaling the mingled scents of smoke, herbs, and sweat, and for a moment, you imagine that these small acts, repeated across centuries, are themselves a form of resistance, a quiet defiance against the inevitable. You find yourself in a small, dimly lit room filled with the scent of spices and dried herbs. A table is cluttered with jars containing strange powders, roots, and animal parts: powdered rhino horn, crushed snakes, dried beetles, and shimmering minerals. A healer, part chemist, part mystic, moves carefully among them, muttering measurements and murmuring prayers. This is the world of alchemy and early pharmacology, where the line between magic and medicine is nearly invisible. You watch as he prepares a remedy for a patient with a persistent cough. He mixes powdered pearls with honey and a pinch of powdered lead, stirring in a specific pattern, clockwise and counterclockwise. Some of the ingredients seem harmless, others dangerously toxic, but the ritual of combination is as important as the chemicals themselves. Historians still debate whether these compounds had any real effect, or whether the placebo effect, combined with careful care, accounted for most recoveries. Across the globe, similar practices emerge. In China, Taoist physicians combine minerals, herbs, and animal parts, believing that specific ingredients harmonize the body's energy, or qi. In India, Ayurvedic practitioners carefully measure doshas, balancing the elements through diet, herbs, and behavioral prescriptions. Even in medieval Europe, monasteries preserve Greek and Roman medical texts, experimenting with herbal mixtures and minerals. Each culture devises its own logic, rooted in observation, tradition, and a hint of faith. You lean closer, noticing a powder that glitters faintly in the candlelight. It's cinnabar, mercury sulfide, used to treat infection, fever, or even insanity. Handling it feels dangerous. Inhaling it could harm you, yet it's considered a cure. The healer dips his finger, applies a small amount to a patient's chest, and murmurs a blessing. The patient flinches, then relaxes as if the ritual itself has already done half the work. Alchemy is more than medicine, it's a worldview. It teaches that transformation is possible, that base matter can become gold, disease can become health, and chaos can be turned into order. You notice parallels with the body itself. Imbalance can be corrected, toxicity can be neutralized, life can be coaxed from decay. Even when the science is flawed, the philosophy shapes centuries of thought. A curious smell drifts from another table, something burnt, sweet, and sharp. The healer explains that this is a purgative. It will make the patient vomit, driving disease out. The logic is simple yet terrifying. To remove sickness, one must sometimes invite pain. You watch the patient's face tighten, body convulsing, and you feel the raw vulnerability of human trust in the hands of knowledge that is part science, part speculation. Quirky remedies abound: powdered crocodile teeth for strength, ground pearls for the heart, crushed ants for vitality. Some may have had minor effects, others were purely symbolic. You realize that human imagination was as vital to healing as observation. To survive, one had to believe in the cure, in the practitioner, and in the unseen forces guiding the process. You notice that the healer keeps detailed notes, symbols, sketches, measurements. Despite the mystical air, there is method behind the chaos. Record-keeping, repetition, and observation are the early foundations of experimentation. Without realizing it, these alchemists of the body are inventing science through ritual. Outside, the wind shifts, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant smoke. The patient lies quietly, the cinnabar glinting on their chest, while you absorb the lesson of centuries. Healing has always been a combination of care, courage, and the delicate interplay between knowledge and belief. Even in its most bizarre forms, medicine seeks balance, to correct what is broken, to remove what is harmful, and to guide the fragile human body back toward harmony. You feel a deep respect for these early practitioners, daring enough to experiment, humble enough to pray, and persistent enough to leave a legacy that echoes in modern pharmacology. The room you enter now is quieter, almost sterile compared to the chaos you've witnessed. A single beam of sunlight cuts through a narrow window, illuminating shelves lined with jars, scrolls, and implements polished to a shine. You realize you are inside an early medical school, a place where knowledge begins to formalize, where apprenticeship replaces instinct, and observation starts to rival faith. A teacher, wearing a long robe, gestures to a group of students clustered around a cadaver. The body is laid bare, muscles and organs exposed with a precision that is both mesmerizing and unsettling. You notice the students taking notes, whispering to one another, occasionally touching a tendon or artery with reverent curiosity. This is anatomy in its infancy, crude by modern standards, yet revolutionary in its intent. Historians still argue about how much early dissections actually improved outcomes, but one thing is clear: seeing the body firsthand changes understanding in a way books alone cannot. The teacher begins a lecture, his voice calm and deliberate, guiding the students' hands. "This is the heart," he says, pressing gently. "This is the liver. Observe the texture, the color. Learn not only to treat but to know." The cadaver, once a person, becomes a living classroom, an eternal patient whose gift is knowledge. You shiver slightly, imagining yourself in that role, a silent teacher across centuries. Meanwhile, in Salerno, Italy, and later in Montpellier, France, medical schools preserve and expand upon classical texts. Hippocrates, Galen, and Avicenna serve as cornerstones, their theories debated and sometimes challenged. Students memorize herbs, surgical techniques, and the proper timing of treatments according to the stars and seasons. Practical experience is limited, but every observation is a building block, a brick in the foundation of modern medicine. You watch a student remove the brain with a delicate, trembling hand. The teacher guides him, correcting angles, emphasizing care. The smell of the room is sharp, preserved organs, ink, and the faint tinge of formaldehyde-like substances. You note the contrast with the chaotic hospitals and shrines you visited. Here, structure replaces ritual, and evidence begins to rival faith. Yet superstition lingers. Even as students dissect and measure, they whisper prayers, take precautions against spirits, and follow age-old traditions. Healing is still entwined with belief. Mercury and leeches remain in use. The miasma theory still dominates much thought. Knowledge advances incrementally, often slow and painstaking, but each step forward carries the weight of generations of trial and error. You notice a student faint slightly, overcome by the smell or the intensity. A classmate steadies him, while the teacher continues, unfazed. There is a rhythm here: observation, repetition, mentorship, a method that will echo across the centuries, eventually giving birth to the scientific method. The practical lessons extend beyond the cadaver. Students observe patients, take notes on fevers, rashes, and recovery patterns. They record herbs used, methods of application, and outcomes. Some remedies are wildly effective, others are quixotic or dangerous. Still, the foundation of systematic recording is being laid. Outside, the streets hum with life, carrying the smells of bread, smoke, and the faint stench of the sick. Knowledge grows quietly behind closed doors, but the world remains harsh. Students graduate into a reality where belief, fear, and trial govern much of medical practice. Success is measured in survival, courage, and observation, not in scientific certainty. You lie back, imagining the echo of their footsteps, the whisper of their notes, and the hushed reverence of those who dare to know the human body. The lesson is clear: medicine is evolving, slowly, painfully, but inevitably toward understanding. And you feel a strange gratitude for those early scholars, for their courage to learn, experiment, and record even amidst uncertainty. You wander into a dimly lit apothecary, the air thick with the smell of dried herbs, fermented roots, and resinous oils. Shelves line the walls, crammed with jars labeled in faded ink, saffron, juniper, poppy, and a host of other ingredients that promise relief, or perhaps disaster. This is the realm of pharmacy before regulation, a delicate balance between knowledge, intuition, and risk. A man in a robe moves with precision, grinding roots in a mortar, measuring powders on a scale, mixing liquids with careful deliberation. Each compound is unique, often prepared on the spot for a specific patient. He murmurs the name of the patient, the ailment, and the intended effect, as if speaking to the substances themselves. You realize that, like the alchemists, these early pharmacists blended art and science, ritual and observation. Some remedies seem harmless, a tea brewed from chamomile for sleep, or peppermint for stomach aches. Others are far more dangerous: mercury for infections, arsenic for skin conditions, opium for pain, sometimes dosed generously. You flinch as the assistant measures a dark liquid, realizing that a single error could kill. Yet, people trusted these apothecaries, sending their lives into the hands of someone mixing powders, oils, and herbs, hoping for relief. Historians still debate how much was effective medicine and how much was the placebo of ritual, but outcomes mattered more than understanding. Across the world, similar practices evolve. In China, herbalists prepare formulas combining dozens of ingredients to treat fever, infections, or chronic ailments. In India, Ayurvedic practitioners weigh doshas and prescribe precise combinations of minerals and plants. Even in Europe, monasteries preserve knowledge from the Greeks and Romans, recording remedies that are surprisingly sophisticated, considering the limited scientific understanding of the time. You watch the apothecary carefully label each jar and vial. The handwriting is meticulous, a mix of letters and symbols designed to communicate instructions clearly. There is an elegance here, a deliberate rhythm of preparation, observation, and recording. Each remedy is both a hope and a calculated risk, a reflection of centuries of trial and error. The patient arrives, a child with fever, eyes glassy and unsteady. The apothecary selects a combination of honey, crushed mint, and a drop of opium. The child's parent hesitates, but the apothecary reassures them, explaining the balance between effectiveness and danger. You notice the subtle trust in their eyes, not blind faith, but hope born from experience and careful observation. Even the quirkiest remedies have logic behind them. Garlic for infection, willow bark for pain, minerals for strength. Early chemists may not have understood the mechanisms, but centuries of observation revealed patterns. They experimented, failed, adjusted, and recorded, creating a system that, while imperfect, was surprisingly methodical. Outside, you hear the hum of the market, merchants calling out, carts rattling, children laughing. The world continues, unaware of the quiet alchemy happening behind these shelves. Yet every measured powder, every careful mixture, has the potential to change a life, to ease suffering, to fight illness, to tip the balance between despair and recovery. Historians still argue about the safety of these early pharmacies, but one truth is undeniable: the apothecary's careful hands, knowledge, and courage often determined whether patients survived or perished. You lean back, inhaling the mingled scents, and understand that the roots of modern medicine are here, hidden in dust, ink, and mortar. The night feels heavier as you walk along the cobbled streets of a medieval city, the scent of smoke and damp stone pressing into your senses. Torches flicker along the walls of the hospital, casting elongated shadows that twist like restless spirits. You enter a room where a line of patients waits, each clutching a small bundle of belongings, their history, their fears, their hope. This is the realm of public health before understanding germs, a chaotic experiment in managing disease at scale. You notice the measures in place. The sick are isolated, families are warned to keep distance, and some buildings are fumigated with vinegar and herbs. Quarantines are crude but persistent, an early acknowledgement that proximity spreads illness. Historians still argue whether such measures truly slowed epidemics, but they reflect an instinctive grasp of contagion long before microbes were understood. You observe a guard motioning for someone to enter a separate chamber. Fear and resignation follow each step. A healer moves among the patients, offering advice, poultices, and prayers. Children cling to parents, adults clutch each other, and the elderly sway with exhaustion. You note the quiet resilience in their eyes, the willingness to trust the healer despite the evident danger, despite knowing that death could arrive at any moment. Rituals of cleanliness, smoke, and prayer provide structure, reducing panic and offering psychological support, even if the remedies themselves are imperfect. You remember stories from Constantinople, where public health ordinances mandated clean streets, proper disposal of waste, and isolation of the sick. In Venice, officials forced ships to anchor for 40 days, the origin of the term quarantine, before allowing passengers ashore. Though primitive, these measures hint at an understanding of disease transmission, a method born of necessity rather than science. Inside the hospital, patients receive treatments that vary widely: herbal teas, poultices, bloodletting, and even early forms of surgery. Some interventions are mildly effective, others dangerously toxic. You see a young woman tremble as a healer applies a mixture of mercury and honey to her wound. The smell is sharp and metallic, and yet she submits, trusting the ritual, the practitioner, and her own resilience. Quirky and fringe practices abound as well. Charms hung around the neck, incense burned to purify the air, animals used symbolically to ward off evil. You note that even in the chaos, patterns emerge: systematic approaches, observation of outcomes, and careful documentation when possible. These small steps form the skeleton of modern epidemiology. You watch as an older patient begins to recover, fever breaking slowly. Relief spreads through the room, a faint light in the shadow of uncertainty. The healer smiles, adjusting blankets and checking pulses. Care itself, the presence of a skilled and attentive hand, seems to play as much a role as any medicine. Historians still debate whether medieval interventions saved more lives than they harmed, yet the instinct to act, to organize, and to care persists across cultures. You take a deep breath, inhaling the mingled scents of vinegar, herbs, and human resilience, and realize that the foundations of public health are less about understanding germs and more about structured care, observation, and hope. As you step back into the quiet night, the distant hum of the city surrounds you. You feel the weight of centuries of trial and error, of courage and fear, and sense the invisible threads linking healer to patient, knowledge to practice, hope to survival. You step into a university lecture hall, echoing with the low murmur of students and the scrape of chalk against slate. The room smells faintly of ink, wax, and polished wood. Here, the pursuit of medical theory unfolds, a space where observation and debate intertwine. You notice students leaning forward, scribbling notes, occasionally glancing up at diagrams of the human body pinned to the walls. A professor, stern but patient, traces a finger along a chart of veins and arteries. The body is a balance of humors, he says: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Disease arises when balance is disrupted. You hear the words, yet notice how students nod without questioning, absorbing centuries-old wisdom while secretly wondering if there might be another explanation. Historians still argue how seriously such humoral theory guided practice versus how much it merely justified existing treatments. You imagine yourself in the back of the hall, trying to reconcile what you've witnessed: dangerous remedies, heroic midwives, plague-stricken streets, and now formalized education. The contrast is stark: ritual and observation side by side with structured learning. Knowledge is accumulating, sometimes methodically, sometimes chaotically. The professor demonstrates a diagram of the heart and lungs, explaining circulation long before it is fully understood. Students peer closely, comparing diagrams with cadavers they may have seen or will see. The room feels alive, buzzing with curiosity tempered by the weight of tradition. Some students lean toward herbs and mystical remedies, others toward observation and measurement. The tension between old and new is palpable. You notice small details: a student carefully measuring ingredients, another whispering a mnemonic to remember the four humors. These practices are more than rote memorization. They are attempts to systematize understanding in a world still dominated by superstition and anecdote. Even a minor observation, a patient's reaction to a poultice, the timing of fever peaks, is recorded meticulously, a step toward evidence-based practice. Meanwhile, in distant lands, similar efforts are underway. Scholars in Baghdad translate Greek and Roman texts, add their own observations, and circulate them widely. In India, Ayurvedic manuscripts are copied and expanded. Knowledge travels along trade routes, often reshaped by local practice, observation, and necessity. You realize that medicine is becoming a global tapestry, woven from countless small threads. Quirky practices persist. Some students still advocate charms or astrology to guide treatment, a reminder that curiosity and ritual coexisted for centuries. The tension between the mystical and the empirical continues, shaping the evolution of medicine. You watch as the lecture ends. Students fold notes, exchange quiet observations, and leave the hall. The professor remains, marking diagrams, lost in thought. You feel the pulse of learning across generations, tentative, flawed, but persistent. Historians still debate which theories actually saved lives versus which offered mere comfort, yet the accumulation of knowledge is undeniable. You sense that the courage to observe, record, and question lays the foundation for everything that comes next in the story of medicine. You step into a bustling hospital ward, the air heavy with the scent of boiled herbs, unwashed bodies, and the occasional tang of blood. The noise is constant, groans of the sick, footsteps of attendants, and the soft murmurs of nurses offering comfort. This is the era of hospital care evolving, where systematic treatment begins to merge with compassion, observation, and emerging sanitation practices. You follow a nurse as she moves between beds, her hands steady despite the chaos. She checks pulses, applies compresses, and whispers encouragements that seem to ease fear more than any medicine. Patients cling to these gestures, trusting the gentle touch more than the poultices or tonics applied. You realize that care itself, attentiveness, and presence have always been an essential component of healing, long before modern medicine recognized the importance of bedside manner. The ward is crowded. Some patients suffer from fevers, others from injuries, and a few from diseases that the world does not yet understand. Despite limited knowledge of contagion, rudimentary isolation measures are in place. Partitions of wood and cloth separate the sick from the less ill. You notice small rituals, washing hands in vinegar, changing linens, and sprinkling herbs to purify the air. Historians still debate how effective these measures were, but instinctive hygiene clearly saves lives. You watch as a physician walks through the ward, examining each patient, occasionally scribbling notes on parchment. He balances his role as healer with authority and observation, giving instructions to attendants and nurses. The coordination is remarkable, a dance of care and protocol in a world still dominated by superstition. Meanwhile, a young apprentice gathers herbs for a poultice. Chamomile, thyme, and willow bark are crushed and mixed, a simple yet effective treatment for pain and inflammation. The apprentice tastes nothing, fearing the potential toxicity, yet the act itself represents centuries of trial, error, and empirical learning. Quirky methods persist: garlic for infection, mercury for skin disease, a reminder that experimentation often outpaced understanding. You note the social dynamics in the ward, families hovering at the bedside, midwives guiding mothers, and apprentices observing keenly. Knowledge flows in multiple directions, from trained physicians to patients, from experienced nurses to newcomers, from observation to documentation. This network of care is fragile yet remarkably resilient. Outside, you hear the city's distant hum, carts rattling over cobblestones, merchants calling out, and the faint clanging of church bells. Inside, the ward is a microcosm of human struggle, courage, and hope. Patients endure pain, practitioners balance risk and skill, and life persists in the face of uncertainty. Historians still argue about the relative importance of formal hospitals versus home care or midwives, but one truth remains. These wards symbolize the beginning of structured, systematic medical care. They are the precursors of modern hospitals, places where observation, routine, and compassion converge. You lean back, breathing deeply, feeling the rhythm of the ward, the pulse of care, and the quiet resilience of both patients and healers. In this convergence of knowledge, ritual, and attention, you sense the fragile but enduring essence of medicine itself. You enter a quiet chamber, the soft flicker of candlelight casting gentle shadows on the walls. The air smells faintly of herbs and warm wax, a comforting contrast to the chaos of wards and plague-stricken streets. This is the world of medical innovation and early experiments, where observation, courage, and trial converge to push the boundaries of understanding. You watch a physician carefully manipulate a small, intricate device, an early form of surgical tool designed to remove stones or cauterize wounds. His hands are steady, his eyes focused, and yet there's an undercurrent of tension. One slip could mean disaster. You realize that each experiment, each innovative technique, carries not only the potential for healing but also the risk of harm. Historians still argue about the efficacy and ethics of such early interventions, but the boldness is undeniable. A student watches closely, absorbing every motion, every subtle gesture. The patient, pale but alert, lies ready, trusting the practitioner's skill. Outside, the faint sounds of life, horses, carts, and distant voices remind you that medicine occurs in the midst of the living world, not in isolation. These practitioners bridge the personal and the public, blending skill, empathy, and courage. You notice small innovations across cultures. In India, surgical techniques like rhinoplasty and cataract removal show remarkable sophistication. In the Islamic world, physicians translate Greek and Roman texts, refine methods, and establish hospitals with dedicated wards. Europe sees the rise of universities, printed texts, and systematic observation. Across centuries and continents, knowledge spreads, adapted and improved by those daring enough to try. Some remedies remain curious or dangerous. Mercury for infection, leeches to rebalance humors, herbal poultices with unpredictable potency. Yet each experiment, whether successful or harmful, adds to the collective understanding. Quirky practices often coexist with careful observation, reminding you that innovation thrives in the tension between risk and insight. You watch the healer document outcomes meticulously, sketching diagrams, noting patient responses, and comparing treatments. This recording is the seed of modern scientific methodology, the awareness that knowledge grows through observation, reflection, and communication. Even mistakes are valuable, contributing to a cumulative understanding that spans generations. Outside the window, the sun dips below the horizon, painting the city in muted gold. The ward quiets, candles burn lower, and the healer steps back, surveying the work completed. Patients rest, some recovering, others quietly enduring, but all touched by the evolving art of medicine. You feel the weight of centuries of trial and error, courage and observation. From dangerous remedies to careful apprenticeships, from plague wards to medical schools, the story is one of persistence, curiosity, and humanity's relentless drive to heal. Each gesture, each observation, each careful experiment is a testament to the lengths humans will go to preserve life, even when understanding is incomplete. Now the world slows. You lie back, letting the weight of history settle softly around you. The chaos of plague, the sharp tang of mercury, the trembling hands of apprentices, the confident touch of midwives, they all fade into a gentle hum of past lives and whispered care. Each healer, each patient, each curious observer carries a story, a fragment of understanding that stretches across centuries, forming a quiet river of human persistence. Imagine the flickering candlelight, the scent of herbs lingering in warm air, the soft shuffle of steps across cold stone floors. You hear faint murmurs of advice, whispers of reassurance, the subtle rhythm of hands moving gently over ailing bodies. The tension eases, replaced by the warmth of observation, the comfort of ritual, and the deep, slow heartbeat of enduring knowledge. Even the quirkiest remedies, the mercury, the leeches, the mystical poultices, soften in memory, becoming echoes of curiosity, courage, and empathy. You feel the patience of generations, the care that tiptoed between harm and healing, and the quiet triumph of life preserved against odds. Historians still debate, and humans still experiment, but here, in this moment, you absorb the continuity of human endeavor. Knowledge, ritual, and compassion intertwine, reminding you that the act of care itself has always been as vital as the remedies applied. Now your eyelids grow heavy. The whispers of the past lull you, the gentle hum of history cradles you, and you drift towards sleep, reassured by the enduring rhythm of courage, observation, and care.